What will you do to unlock innovation? In today's fast-paced world, innovation might not be enough. Tomorrow's pioneers of change will need to be agile, able to adapt, and committed like never before. Your host, Sana Vinding, invites you to listen in and join business leaders from around the world as they share their visions for success in our future business challenges.
Welcome to Mind Innovation. I'm your host, Sana Vinding. I'm always excited to learn. And in today's podcast, we're going to talk about creating an empowered employee culture. I want to welcome Lauren Winans. She has 20 years of HR experience, and she's the CEO and principal consulting at Next Level Benefits. So welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited for our conversation today, Sana.
Me too. So I want to hear about your passion for human resources. Tell me more about that.
Sure. I think like most HR professionals, I kind of ended up in human resources, not necessarily aspired to be there, but I'm so thankful that I landed there because it's been such a wonderful ride. I really enjoy the strategy that comes behind, figuring out culture and engagement. And, I started my career at a health insurance company and then landed in a benefits department within an HR team. And it was just such a good fit. I really enjoy focusing on people strategy, people operations. And, my ultimate goal now that I'm a consultant is to help create more best places to work. It's just something that I've been so excited about over the last 20 some years or so. And I'm glad that I found something that I'm passionate about. Anytime you can improve the lives of employees and ultimately contribute to the larger, workforce at large, you can't beat that.
Yeah, no, it's all about the passion, right? Then you get out there in the morning and you love what you're doing. I looked at some stats and it's, in talking about employee engagement. So I saw that 71 of executives says that employee engagement is critical to their company's success. So let's talk about the engagement, so what it is and how do you keep employees engaged and motivated? And let's also talk about COVID, because how does that, how has COVID actually impacted employees' engagement?
Yeah, well, so when we talk about engagement, I think there's a misconception out there around exactly what engagement means. So engagement really is, do your employees want to come into work every day? Do they want to be a part of the culture that you've cultivated as an employer? These are the types of questions that HR folks kind of ask themselves as they're deciding exactly how to increase or enhance engagement. And so ultimately employee engagement is, exactly kind of how I mentioned it. It's really, it's about, how much the employee is willing to kind of put into the organization, not just because they're collecting a paycheck, but because they're invested in what the company is doing. And, they're working with, team members that they love and they're, serving a bigger purpose. And when employees are fully engaged, what we find through, various statistics and various studies out there is that, the more engaged employees are, the more productive your company is. The bottom line is, absolutely, the sky's the limit really in terms of revenue and all sorts of, metrics that you can kind of place around, finances. But ultimately, I think there can be issues as it relates to engagement when, there's a few, I'll say, minefields that can kind of come up, and that can be poor leadership can kind of thwart engagement. Any sort of, issues as it relates to, pay equity or, lack of comprehensive benefits. These are things that people are kind of like, well, what am I doing here? Or, I'm not really sure this is for me, and anytime, an employee gets to a place where they're not motivated any longer to, really kind of put forth their best effort. That's really challenging for an employer to kind of overcome. Usually in those types of circumstances, that employee is going to need to ultimately leave the organization or somehow find another role within the organization that kind of sparks that engagement again. But to, kind of follow up on that COVID aspect to your question, I think during the pandemic, burnout was really kind of playing here, and still is, a large role in our ability to kind of feel motivated and be engaged in what we're doing every day when it just feels like we're going through the motions each day. And when you're working remotely, like a lot of folks are, it's very challenging to kind of make those connections and to really feel the leadership and the culture and, have a common goal in mind. And so what I've been seeing a lot of companies doing and doing it very well is just being very conscious about communication and being very transparent and checking in with employees regularly. And that has helped to combat some of that burnout a bit, but also help to kind of re-engage the workforce and kind of set them on the course towards, becoming, as motivated as they were when they were on site, now at home, kind of exuding that same level of motivation.
Yeah. So by keeping, not get exhausted and keeping up that motivation, let's talk about the communication part. How do you, what have you seen of a good strategy of how to communicate? What have you seen there, and what's the bad way of communicating, if you have some examples?
Yeah, well, a bad way would be not communicating at all. And there are companies that still, unfortunately are not communicative. Maybe they don't have a internal communications department, or perhaps they're just not that great at sharing, what they're focused on and where their goals are, where the company's headed and how they're going to reach those goals. And so, best practices really are just, communicating regularly and communicating often. So when you think about the organization from the top down, you want to make sure that everyone who's working at an organization really understands how their role fits into the larger framework of the organization and how their work directly impacts the organizational goals. And so you can do that through a variety of different ways, but regular touch points, regular sharing of any sort of organizational strategy and goals as they develop is a really great way to do that. And then also tying the performance goals directly to what the organization is trying to achieve is also a way to kind of put that sense of accountability and responsibility into employees, which generally they want to have. And that really does help with motivation and engagement. So, some examples, additional examples might be, maybe on a quarterly basis, different leaders within the organization, send out messaging, to employees, or perhaps they do a 3 to 5 minute video sharing some things that, some accomplishments that have occurred over the past quarter, and where work's being done to move forward some of the goals of the organization. That has been something, the videos in particular have been something that have really been impactful, particularly over the last 18 months. But yeah, I think, from a best practice standpoint, anything you can do to reach your employees and to explain, the steps that the organization is taking is really valuable. And from a leadership perspective, as a leader, regularly checking in with your employees, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing today? Hey, I noticed that, you put in a lot of time, last week, on the project that you were working on. I'm really thankful for the time that you've put in. Is there anything I can do to help you? Can I remove any barriers for you? What challenges are you facing? Can I help you with that?
Yeah.
That type of dialogue at a leadership and employee level is really going to help to kind of deepen the relationship and make it easier for employees to feel valued. And ultimately, that's what all employees want, is to know where they fit within the organization and feel like they're valued. And so you can do that through small conversations or through big announcements or videos that you might, send out to the organization. They all achieve the same thing. And I think transparency and active, regular communication is the best way to go.
Yeah. So that's more the leadership and communication, where you are, the strategy and all that. What about the small stuff that happened in the office before COVID, where you chit chatted or you heard something through the door? No, not through the door, but that kind of relationship. Where have you seen, what kind of changes have you seen? And again, any good examples of saying this is a good way of doing it? Because I can see people struggle, and I can also see people saying, oh, they actually figured some of it out. But I don't think we have a full solution yet of saying this is the best way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard because I agree with you. We're in the midst of it. So we're trying a bunch of different things and seeing what's working best. So, but it's a really good point. We're missing out on that interaction, that daily interaction that we would have had at work. We're also missing out on the ease at which we could collaborate in the on-site, environment. What I'm finding is a lot of, digital tools that are out there, things like Slack, instant messaging tools, that sort of thing are really helpful, quite frankly. I use them quite a bit with our clients, and it's helpful to just kind of question, or if you just want to see how someone's doing. I was working with someone the other day who wasn't feeling very well. They're feeling under the weather, but I saw that they were online and just kind of checked in. Hey, how you doing? You feeling okay? And she sent back a few lines as well. So it's I think that unfortunately we're having to resort to digital solutions at this point. But Zoom happy hours are having a moment. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of opportunity to try different things and see what works. I know that there are some organizations too that they've created communities based on geography. So most of us are spread out all over the country, and a lot of large employers, for example, are just spread out all over. Some people have moved, during the pandemic or after, recently, to kind of resettle, and they're still working remotely, but they're in totally new places. And, some organizations are creating community groups where, let's say, I'm in the Chicago area, which I'm not, I'm actually in the Pittsburgh area, but I'm in Chicago, and there's, 100 other employees, might not be in my department, but there's 100 other employees that are coworkers who work for the same organization as me, who live in the area, and we're connected through a community that allows us to schedule time outside of work to meet with each other. Or maybe we decide that we're going to meet up at a park, or we're going to meet up at an outdoor restaurant for drinks. Or it allows you to still collaborate on a personal level outside of work, outside of those digital tools that are helping us professionally.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's kind of all over the place, and it's trial and error. Each company kind of has to figure out what works best for them, and each employee has to figure out what works best for them, and each team and leader, it's kind of all over the place. But what I would recommend is that if you haven't put something in place that allows you to personally connect on at least like maybe a monthly basis, you should consider putting something in place, because it does make a big difference.
Yeah, meet on another level. Yeah, and as you say, better just try something. So I'll say do the experiment, right? Don't say we're trying. Just saying, hey, we experimented this, and then see where it goes, because I'm sure you'll get feedback as well of what went well or what didn't went so well. But so you just mentioned saying all the technologies, right? That's going to be part of our lives. We have some, but we had to reskill. I think right. We're all learning how to use Zoom, Teams, all kind of new platforms. How many messengers apps do I have on my phone? Because certain friends only use this one, another one use this one, right? So it's just forced us. So have you seen anything where companies have to go and saying we need to reskill our workforce because of this?
Yeah, I actually have one client in particular, which is a really good example. They're actually reimagining their entire workplace. They're moving from a fully on-site workforce to a remote workforce, and there's a lot of different pieces and parts that you have to think through as you're making that transition.
Yeah.
And one of them is around technology platforms, and they're actually in the process right now of upgrading to more collaboration, to incorporate more collaboration tools into their regular workplace. And as part of that, they're realizing there's a lot of training needs here. We've all gotten used to the minimal platforms that we use today, but as we think about how the workplace is going to evolve and how quickly it's going to evolve, we need to kind of really understand what tools we have at our disposal and what's going to work best for different groups. And then we need to bring the employees along on that ride and make sure that they feel comfortable using the tools, because what's the point of having them if people aren't going to use them? And people tend to not feel comfortable with these different types of technology when it's unknown and they're not sure. And, they perhaps, they've tried and failed at something. And so there is a reskill component here. And I think it's really kind of just making sure that we're meeting employees where they're at. And, HR is, can be great partners at this in partnering with groups like IT to really make sure that, okay, hey, you've identified the great tool IT that we're going to use. Now we need to change management this. Now we need to figure out how do we get the organization to understand how we're going to use these new tools, what the value is, where the training materials are, how we can get leaders on board to provide good examples of, be good stewards of the process and making sure that they're, utilizing the tools effectively.
Yeah.
It's all about evolution at this point. And I think the workplace is evolving at such a rapid pace that we don't want to forget about the reskill component here and the training component that exists.
Yeah. So I've done when learning a new tool, created a meeting that's 20 minutes every week between marketing engineers and sales, and called it the CRM Academy. So we meet 20 minutes. Sometimes we cancel a meeting when we meet in and saying, I don't have an update, but we can actually share and saying, hey, I learned this with the new tool last week and I want to share that. Or I'm struggling. I don't know how to do this or how to make this smarter or how to automate it. But we're sharing our experience, and it can be a happy experience, or it can be a struggle. And it's only 20 minutes. You can do that 20 minutes. And it's been such a success. We've actually been doing that for a year. And I love it because it builds personal relationships as well when we do it, because we're chit-chatting a little bit. And we also learn and we grow as a team, and especially on that cross-functional. So that's my advice going into new technologies.
That's such a great example. That's such a great example of, being resourceful as a team and then leveraging the experiences that you've had with this tool. And I think that is something that is going to be super beneficial if people take advantage of that. I mean, even like you said, 20 minutes, that's like nothing in comparison. And I bet you're learning way more about the tool than actually reviewing the training guide that might have been provided to you. So
and we learn on the way. And what I've seen is that it's not just, oh, this is a marketing tool. It turned into be our tool. Right? Everybody has responsibility, which is a bigger impact. It's not just pointing at one team saying it's your tool.
What's nice too is it's another touch point with your coworkers that you might not have regularly had in your workday. And it's, hey, we're chit-chatting about best practices around how this tool works, but we're also getting a chance to see each other's faces, probably via Zoom, mind you, but still, we're getting to interact. And, anytime you can kind of infuse that into your day, it's really kind of satisfying, both angles here, right? You guys are getting out of it what you need to from a training and reskilling perspective, but you're also getting a chance to engage with one another. And that's, that's ideally what's going to make each day a lot easier and a lot better to get through.
Definitely. What about if we talk about mistakes? What have you seen, with small, medium, and big companies or businesses? What are the common mistakes that they do?
Yeah, I would say one of the big ones is lack of communication, which we've kind of already, talked through. That's something that I see pretty repeatedly at all sizes, not necessarily, regularly communicating or saying that more information is coming and forgetting to send more information, or not necessarily regrouping when something has changed. So, there's tons of times, particularly during this pandemic, but, where, you might put something out there, but then have to change course because something has kind of crept up as a hurdle or an obstacle, and you need to kind of change things. Well, the people that you communicated to need to hear that, they need to go back and you need to revisit and say, hey, remember when we said X, Y, and Z? Well, now it's A, B, C, and here's why. And so I think that, transparency and communication is probably the number one mistake that I see, regardless of size and regardless of industry. But I would also say that from, when I think about engagement and leadership, I see that smaller companies, they do seem to have some trouble with engagement on some levels, meaning that, I think that they can develop a very close-knit group, but sometimes they don't always understand the direction of the organization, especially if it's a small business or a family business. Sometimes it's very challenging to really understand, how do I fit? How are we doing this? And is what I'm doing providing value? Should I be changing course? So they don't always get the direct feedback that they might necessarily need to be able to pivot, change how they're doing things, they meaning employees. And so I think there's an opportunity there, for small employers to really kind of think through, are we being clear in our expectations, and are we making sure that people understand the goals and where we're headed? Because sometimes small businesses don't always document their vision, their mission, their values, their goals. And so there's opportunity there. I think mid-size to large kind of share very similar, a lot of commonalities when it comes to workforce and labor and how, all of that is structured. I do think that some mistakes there that could be rectified are really, just making sure that, people are, they're comfortable with leadership, that they understand, where they can make an impact. Really the biggest mistake I see is when leaders don't, regularly communicate expectation, and or they don't take the time to provide feedback in the moment. So kind of similar to what I was just sharing related to small businesses, but with this angle, it's more around, leaders not necessarily maybe waiting until the annual performance review to give feedback, as opposed to giving it in the moment regularly on a regular basis to see performance improve over time, and to give clarity to the employee to see, okay, this is what they want from me. This is how this is going to work. And so, those are probably, I would say, the biggest, mistakes that I see kind of happening. There's a lot of others, but I would say those are the ones that, if they're very easy to fix, and they make the biggest impact when they're done incorrectly. They have the most negative impact, and the ripple effect can be very challenging. It can result in turnover. It can result in miscommunication. It can, result in, teams not being able to cooperate with one another because they don't understand what they want from each other. And so it's something that can be easily resolved.
Yeah. So with the communication, you build trust, right? Because you have that transparency. Is there other ways? Because you need to build a lot more trust. Again, right? Having that and empowering employees and trusting everybody also gives you more productivity and happy engagement and all that. So is there other ways that you can, communication is one part, but how do you support the growing of trust in different teams or across different teams?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because, trust is a very tricky subject, because there are teams that are very competitive with one another that make it challenging to kind of build that level of trust. But then there are teams who are able to do it super easy because they're comfortable with one another. They're not necessarily as competitive. They want to see each other, win, and celebrate those wins. So, I would say, two things come to mind when it comes to kind of instilling that trust amongst teams, and leaders for that matter. One would be, really making sure that that the conversations that you're having with each other are direct and respectful, and open. And I think that when you put out there that, hey, I'm a teammate of yours, I've got your back, but I'm going to share feedback with you so that we can all be better. That your team knows that you're coming from a place of, you're not being malicious. You're not trying to do anything negative. You're trying to express yourself so that you can all be better. And so, what I would recommend is, really staying focused on, that trust angle from a perspective of making sure that, you're very clear with, how you, perceive different things with each other. Like, for example, I'm thinking of this example in particular around a project. So if you're working on a project with one another, you want to be clear about, okay, if you're handling this, I'm handling that. If that, particular piece of the project is not necessarily meeting the standards of the others, you have to have that tough dialogue.
Yeah.
If you don't have a really good sense of trust amongst your team, that tough dialogue can turn into something that results in, the breakdown of relationships. But if you have trust and you know that that person's coming from a place of just wanting the work product to be better and wanting you to shine and wanting, all of you to have a good team experience, then it's a different perspective. You're not necessarily looking at it with the lens of being defensive. You're looking at it with the lens of, oh, okay, they want to see the best out of me and they want to see the best out of this team. I think also too, second, from a trust perspective, accountability is a really important piece of the puzzle here. Mm-hmm. If you are a team member that consistently misses deadlines or doesn't take accountability or responsibility for your portion of the work, it's very difficult for your team members to trust that you're going to be, reliable, responsible. And, there might be, issues later down the line around performance that may impact the team, as a whole. And so I think that trust is super important, but accountability is really, part of the equation as well. And, making sure that you're very, clear and open with one another and let people know that you're coming from a place of, I just want to see you do well.
Yeah. No, and it all starts again back to that communication.
It's
how, right?
For me, and I think there's a common theme in everything I talk about is, for me, communication is so critical. And it's the thing that I see when there is a lack of communication or, some sort of hurdles around understanding each other's, where they're coming from. Those are the biggest issues that I see in the work that we do with our clients is the most challenging situations arise from a lack of communication. And so foundationally, if that is part of how you lead or how you interact with other team members, it's going to make a huge impact on really everything else. And so that's, probably why I'm way more focused on communication than I should be, but it's just because I've seen the downside of the lack of communication.
That's a good one. So we learn every day. So what, you know more now than you did 10 years ago. So what would you have told yourself like 10 years ago?
I probably, gosh, I'm trying to put myself in that place of where I was 10 years ago. I probably would tell myself that to have more patience. I think that was something that I lacked in my younger years. I was very much, and still am to this day, a perfectionist, and that does get in my way sometimes. It's much more manageable now than it was, but I really lacked patience when it came to, certain things professionally that just, weren't necessarily going the way that I wanted them to, whether it be a project or whether it be a career path or whether it be a, professional relationship. It was challenging for me to accept that, not everything works out the way that I want it to. And so I would say that, patience and maybe, less perfectionism, kind of managing that perfectionism a bit would have been some advice I would have given, myself if I had a chance to chat with that person who existed 10 years ago. That's a different person today.
But that's good, right? We learn every day.
Right.
It would be scary if we haven't changed in 10 years. So
That's for sure.
yeah, that's for sure. So if somebody wants to contact you, where can they find you?
Sure. So thanks for asking. Yeah, I mean, Next Level Benefits, our website, nlbenefits.com, is a great place to check out what we're working on, how we help our clients. We also feature some of our clients on the website, provide some commentary from them. And it's the best way to get in touch with me. You can schedule a call or send me an email via the site. And it's a great way to connect and to understand how we can help you, and how we can help you create more best places to work.
Great. So thank you so much, Lauren. This was just a great talk or chat today. And I think it's so important that the employee engagement is just a necessary priority, right, for every business. And it's not just for next year. It's just a key. You need to have this.
It is. Engagement and communication are hand in hand. And there's so many different ways that you can influence that as a leader, as a organization in general, an HR professional, an employee, so many different ways to make an impact. I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. If you enjoy this podcast, maybe you'd like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure also to check out our website, mindtheinnovation.com. And remember, stay curious and keep learning.